Hey everybody, welcome to week 2. We're going to dive right in because we have a lot of content to cover. For those of you who were in class, you know that this was a long lecture. I'm trying to condense this into a more nuts and bolts approach for those of you who are listening online so that you can get the material you need to move forward in this course. The goal here tonight is to provide you with an overview of program evaluation. And then after that, we'll start to delve into the specifics of different types of program evaluation, why we do them, what they offer, what they tell us, so on and so forth. So I want to start by defining a social program. It's fine to talk about evaluating social programs, but I want to ground us in the foundational definition of what a social program is. So a social program can be defined as an initiative, often in the form of an organized service or activity, which is designed to target an identified need in the community and improve social conditions for the members of that community. By targeting social needs, I'm talking about food insecurity, homelessness, poverty, literacy, almost anything that you can think of that is a gap in needs that places people in a place, potentially a situation of vulnerability, or where they cannot access the resources that they need to meet that need themselves. Additionally, a social program can also target psychological needs. Here we're talking about attitudes, beliefs, motivations to change. And these two, social needs and psychological needs, are often intertwined, and often you might tackle both, or you might see both targeted in a social program. A couple of well-known multi-jurisdictional programs that we have around here in Ontario include Alcoholics Anonymous or the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. At a local level, we have at Nipissing, the student union delivering their emergency student food bank. Here, university students are able to access the food bank each week for 1 bag of food per week. This allows anybody who might be experiencing some shortage of funds or other concerns where they might not be able to eat that week, is helping to meet that need, is filling that gap. That's what a social program is after. It wants to essentially identify a gap in a specific population, a need area that can be addressed by an intervention. So if we have an understanding of what a social program is, then we can start to talk about what a program evaluation is. And program evaluation is rooted in the social sciences, and it's traceable back to the beginnings of modern science. However, only recently, in the 20th century, was it more formally defined into an actual applied science, or applied social science. At its earliest, some of the earliest recorded initiatives track back to Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century. Some of you might remember him or recall him from social theory courses. He was a foundational social theorist. He wrote the Leviathan, and he's credited with the early work on the concept of the social contract. At its earliest, it was a very undefined field, if you could even call it a field itself. However, there is evidence that work was being done in this area. As it evolved, it's evolved into the shape that we know it today. And program evaluation now can be considered the application of social science methods to systematically investigate the effectiveness of social intervention programs in many ways that are adapted to their political and organizational environments. And they're designed to inform social action to improve social conditions. So I want to unpack that a little bit. And we're going to continue to unpack that through the first part of this lecture. But systematically, that was something new. We're starting to formalize our approach. We're starting to make it something that has a methodology behind it, that has a theoretical foundation behind it, and it's something that is articulated in a manner that down the road, if somebody were to want to replicate your study, it could be done because it is replicable. Systematic means that it's methodical, planned, and logically constructed. Using an empirical social science lens, we're gathering evidence to answer questions about the program. This formalizes what was traditionally based on anecdotal impressions, it reduces biases, and it allows, again, for replicability. This methodology can be quantitative or qualitative. It can be a blended mixed method approach. And program evaluations are mindful of the social and political context that the program is operating in and that participants are living in. A program does not operate outside of the community or the political or social context in which that community exists. Similarly, the evaluator is placed within his or her own social and political context as they're completing the evaluation. At the end, a program evaluation is looking to see positive social change, and even if that is achieved, we're still looking to have it result in recommendations for next steps and highlight areas of strength and areas for improvement. Social programs operate in various realms, and thus social program evaluation finds itself operating in those same sectors. This could be within the government or the nonprofit sphere, advertising, marketing, political arenas, anywhere where people are operating as a community, there is the potential for a social program, and where a social program exists, there's the opportunity for this evaluation of that program. One thing I do want to clarify before we move forward, and it's something that's not, I don't believe, explicitly stated in your textbook, but it's a common misconception that exists. An evaluation is not the same thing as an audit. And this is going to become increasingly clear as we move through this course. But right now, I just want you to understand that an audit often measures basic compliance with standing procedures and processes. It's a very technical approach, and it does share some commonalities with evaluation, but they're not the same thing. So for example, in an audit, if a client attends a service and a form is completed, an audit may be undertaken to take a look at how often is this being done and what are the errors that come with that form. Or an audit is often undertaken by financial institutions, or accounting teams in a business to ensure that mistakes are not being made, which reduces the risk to the organization. Where issues are found, often it will reflect on particular individuals. So employee A consistently fails to run a credit check on our clients. There is a risk involved. We need to provide corrective action to employee A. An evaluation, on the other hand, is concerned with the effectiveness of the program on a specific population. While it does want to mitigate risk by ensuring that more good is done and unintentional harm is avoided, this is not the same as the audit's goal to reduce financial or legal risk. The evaluation is less concerned with this risk and more concerned with the merit and value of a program or initiative. These two terms are not often distinguished clearly. Sometimes you may be completing an evaluation and somebody will make the joke that you're here to audit them. I've had that happen multiple times, and sometimes you need to sit down and explain that that's a misconception, that you're not here to evaluate individuals and it's not a punitive approach, but rather we're here to make sure that the program itself is functioning well and it's bringing about that positive change that it was intended and designed to do. The reason I spell this out is I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. We come from a variety of backgrounds in this class, and I just want to make sure that we are using the terms and separating the terms clearly. While both an audit and an evaluation do objectively analyze data with defined standards and protocols, and they both do seek to assess an outcome, they're still not the same thing. We're targeting a program, we're looking for that change, we're expecting to see a change process and some action from it. We're not just reviewing files and looking for errors to make sure that there is compliance. And I hope that that clarifies it for anybody who may have heard them used synonymously in the past. So why is program evaluation needed? It's as common sense as it might seem. We want to make sure that the programs are meeting the outcomes that they intended. So generally, social programs aim to bring about positive change, helping to address social need in a specific community. However, even now, programs are often implemented without considering a scientific approach to its development, implementation, or thinking ahead to measuring those outcomes. We know that we have found a need. We know that we have designed a program that should impact that need in a positive way. However, we fail to sometimes look ahead to say, how will we know it works? Because it's a relatively new field, there's still eyebrows that are sometimes raised when you say, I can actually measure that, and I can actually tell you concretely whether your program is working or not, and it's going to be based on more than gut feelings or overall impressions. The field of program evaluation is becoming more prevalent because it helps to answer the questions such as, is this program worth the money? Are we seeing the changes we anticipated? Should we continue to devote resources to this initiative? Is the program operating and abiding by the procedures in place? And so on. We're looking at determining whether a program works. And then from there, we want to be able to break it down to show what is working, what's not working. We're interested in both sides of that coin. This means that a program evaluation needs to be meticulous and nuanced. Generalities aren't very helpful for narrowing down and teasing apart what works and what doesn't work. This leads us into justifying why evaluation has become a systematic approach. We want to be able to tease apart all those conflicting pieces that might be contributing to our program's success or contributing to our program's failure. Just because you design a program, it should go without saying, does not mean that you're guaranteed success, even if it's based on something that sounds absolutely logical, and even if you've seen it operate well in another jurisdiction or another community. So how do we tease that apart? Especially when we're dealing with inherent issues that come with studying humans. Humans are messy. With rare exceptions, some program participants will show an improvement on the outcomes of the program targets. For example, a program targeting depression. Ideally, we want to see our population see less depression by the end. Other examples could include higher academic achievement, obtaining employment, fewer arrests, and so on, depending on the focus of that program. But just because they experience that change and that change in the anticipated and positive direction doesn't necessarily mean that these gains were caused by participation in the program. Improvement for at least some of these individuals may have happened anyways in the natural course of events without the help of our program, or parts of their natural course of life or other pieces of their life may have contributed to the positive outcome, so we can't say that all of the good stuff came from our program. For example, perhaps an individual is enrolled in a program targeting criminal thinking. However, say this program also becomes apparent during the program. Criminological research has found that life changes, such as employment, marriage, or the birth of a child, often can lead to a desistance from crime. So disentangling the effects is sometimes difficult. Is this person's change due to the program, or is it due to other factors we know can impact the targeted behavior or need? This is the relativity of program effects. This is something that we're trying to sort out, and it's something that, because we're humans, we're not doing this in a controlled scientific environment. We don't necessarily have the ability to control the rest of our participants' lives. We can target their need area, we can offer them our services, but they might also have other things happening in their lives that are also helping to bring about that positive change. What's the big deal? Well, part of it is we might end up overestimating the effect of our program. We might be saying that this program absolutely revolutionizes lives, but in reality, if you were able to measure other aspects of your participants' lives, you might see that that change has a smaller magnitude. Doesn't mean that the program isn't working, but it means that we're potentially saying it's working better than it actually is. A systematic approach then can help to mitigate this risk by ensuring we look at what outcomes could be expected if there was no program participation at all. Some approaches to identifying program effects rely on asking participants about their impressions. It's one way to start to drill into this. I don't know what else is happening in your life, but you came to my program for 12 weeks. Did it help? Unfortunately, often participant opinion is not a very reliable measure. Many times a program with negative outcomes will still receive favorable reflections from the participants. This is possibly because they appreciate that people were still offering them this program, or that they might see change that we don't see when we actually measure it. They might have a feeling that this program worked, but when we actually sit down to assess it, that feeling of change might not be substantiated. So an alternative approach might be to ask those delivering the program, so case managers, program facilitators, etc., to give their reflection on whether the program worked. But again, this isn't the most reliable measure. A risk on this side is what we call confirmation bias, where individuals tend to see things that support their pre-existing beliefs. We see that everywhere. We see that in the media. We see that especially on social media in the last few years. But essentially, if facilitators believe in the program, they may be less likely to see it as not working. Consider it like an echo chamber. Pretend we were the program facilitators. We were told that the program would make a big difference, and now we're not looking to discredit that. We're looking for experiences that confirm that it's making that difference. And we might interpret some markers or some indicators as that evidence, even if it's not. So this is where we start to apply the social science research methods. This is how we bring some methodology and some empirical rigor to our systematic program evaluation approach. The book, our textbook, describes two primary facets of program evaluation, and it describes it as the two arms, if you will. The first requires establishing a summarization of the program's performance. The second establishes standards and criteria for judging that performance. For example, I could tell you that our analysis indicates that 66% or 2/3 of participants experienced a positive impact from our program, whatever our program is. Is this good? Is this bad? There needs to be standards to compare the results against for there to be a true meaning derived. Traditionally, evaluations stop at this stage though. They report the statistic. There was a 66% increase in this, which is the positive anticipated direction of change. And that is defined as success. But there needs to be more criteria to what success constitutes. So often evaluations stop at the point where they report the outcomes and they don't contextualize the outcomes by establishing a criteria of what success should look like. Establishing these standards to assess the outcome is part of what it takes an evaluation from a simple cause and effect analysis to a more complex report that can capture the value, merit, and actual worth of a program. To address both of these arms, if you will, evaluators rely heavily on their social science research methods toolbox. These gold standard approaches allow for the measurement and assessment of outcomes utilizing approaches that have been developed in response to the need to have a scientific way to study the human social phenomena. Quantitative methods, qualitative methods, even mixed method approaches enable rigorous, replicable analyses. While we are all probably familiar with many of these now traditional approaches, and that could be regression analysis, t-tests. On the qualitative side, we might be looking at thematic analysis. Social scientists are still always innovating new ways to measure complex human social phenomena. I think I might have skipped no, I didn't. So we know it needs to be systematic. We know that we have a tool set in our social science approaches, quantitative or qualitative, but there's other factors that we also want to keep in mind. And one of those is that we need to adapt to the political and organizational context that we're operating in. So I alluded to this earlier, I think, but evaluation doesn't happen in isolation, in a vacuum, on an island unto itself. It is situated within an organization which has social and political contexts, priorities, and requirements. It's also situated in communities and populations that have social and political contexts, priorities, and requirements. So there's multiple players involved who have goals for the evaluation. They have a vested interest in the outcome and various viewpoints that come with their positioning in the surrounding political, organizational, and social context. These individuals often have questions in mind that they want the evaluation to answer. And based on what their role is and what their positioning is, their questions may be very different. These individuals can be grouped into two categories. The first is that of the evaluation sponsor, who is the person or team or entity that requests the evaluation. This could be managers in the organization. This could be the people who have funded the program. But they are typically the ones who are commissioning the evaluation from the get-go. Then we also have our stakeholders, and these are individuals, groups, or organizations, with a significant interest in how well the program is working. So, examples of some stakeholders: funders, community members, program participants, regulatory bodies, program collaborators, legal advisors, decision and policy makers, etc. Defining who the sponsor is and who your stakeholders are from the beginning of any evaluation is a best practice. Noting what their goals and involvement are allows the evaluator to be mindful of these roles and their interests throughout the evaluation and ensure that everyone's purposes are met as best as possible. The questions they ask might be stipulated in specific fixed terms that allow little flexibility, such as in a detailed contract for evaluation services. Sometimes your evaluation is already given to you. It's spelled out, it is nuanced, and you're following a game plan. However, it's not unusual for the initial questions that your sponsor or stakeholders are asking to be vague, overly general, phrased in program jargon that needs to be translated for more general consumption, or they may have not articulated the questions at all, and they may live as assumptions that you'll know what to measure. So it's part of the evaluator's role to ensure that the questions, which are not already specific and which may not already be explicit, are probed further to develop a question that is specific enough to be addressed and operationalized to ensure that it can be measured down the road. For example, if I ask you, does the program work? That's a very broad question. Clearly defining the nuances of what that means will allow the evaluator to hit the targets that the sponsor and stakeholders are interested in, as well as set the evaluator up for designing an evaluation to answer those questions. Because for every question, you're going to have to eventually devise a way to measure and analyze the data, as well as interpret what that outcome means. Additionally, I just kind of got lost there for a second. Additionally, the questions need to be formulated to ensure that the answers will be in a form that is useful to the sponsor and stakeholders. So you could write a very highly scientific paper. You could be spouting p-values left, right, and center. But is that useful to the stakeholders? Is it useful to the sponsor? It really depends on who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to a highly scientific audience, yes, that might be exactly what they need. If you're speaking to a more grassroots, community-minded organization, they want to know if it works, and they want you to be able to communicate that it works in ways that are meaningful to them. So, you may have heard sometimes in the past when anytime you are essentially completing a project for somebody else, you need to know who your audience is. This is where that fits here. Your sponsor and your stakeholders are the audience, and they might be at an arm's length, or they might be right there with you every step of the way. Knowing what they need and what they are looking for and what they expect, and then using your evaluation toolbox to convert that into meaningful questions that encompass and capture what they may not be able to articulate so clearly themselves. That's where the evaluator can really add structure that's going to benefit not only the evaluation, but the evaluator's experience doing the evaluation. So the purpose of an evaluation is twofold. We've emphasized that the role of evaluation is to provide answers to questions about a program that will be useful and will be used. And I don't want to overshadow that. This point is fundamental to evaluation. Its purpose is to influence action. The questions we ask, the answers we find, should be a catalyst for action. An evaluation, therefore, primarily addresses the audiences with the potential to make decisions and take action on the basis of evaluation results. It provides the audience with evidence-based information to make decisions. The evaluation findings may, for example, assist in making go or no-go decisions about a specific program modification, perhaps about an initiation of a program or the continuation of the entire program. Additionally, an evaluation may, or the findings from the evaluation may, have a direct effect on the judgment of a program's value as part of an oversight process that holds the program accountable for results. Or it may have an indirect effect in shaping the way the program issues are framed and the nature of the debate about them. Either way, it is providing the evidence to get people talking, to get ideas generated, to get judgment calls made based on empirical evidence that carries some weight. Again, we're getting away from impressions that something works, and we're looking to actually measure and study it. One important form of evaluation research that is conducted is demonstration programs. These are social intervention projects, so social programs, designed and implemented explicitly to test the value of an innovative program concept. In such cases, the findings are significant because of what they reveal about the program concept and how promising it is for the broader implementation. I was trained to call this a pilot project. Not everybody across the field will call it that. Obviously, they've chosen demonstration program here. But what we're getting at is it's an opportunity to test out a program, to explore. It's the exploratory stage. We might offer the program and we might do an initial evaluation before it's rolled out more fully. That way we can see, is it working? Is it promising? What are some barriers that they run into? Or in a worst case scenario, we might find those fundamental flaws, and that allows us to fix that before the program actually takes off. Another significant evaluation-related activity is the integration of the findings of multiple evaluations into a particular type of program into a synthesis that can inform policymaking and program planning. This is akin to a meta-analysis, if you're familiar with that term. You're essentially systematically assessing previous research studies and formulating overall conclusions about that body of research. Whether focused on an individual program or a collection of programs, the common denominator in all evaluation research is that it's intended to be both useful and used, either directly and immediately or as an incremental contribution to a cumulative body of practical knowledge. So some evaluations and some evaluation efforts are to generate knowledge for knowledge's sake. More commonly, evaluations are used to help assess the worth and merit of a program, to find out whether it's operating as it should, and to diagnose issues or highlight areas of strength as the program is unfolding. Evaluations are initiated for many reasons. They may be intended to target one of these 5 areas that you see on the screen. They might help management to improve a program. This is otherwise known as a formative evaluation, as it intends to help shape or form the program. The evaluation might be intended to support advocacy by proponents or critics. So it might be used to help get buy-in and to get momentum and to get people supporting the delivery of it, or vice versa. If it's critical of a different aspect, those results may actually help that side. An evaluation may be completed with the intention of gaining knowledge about a program's effects. So that is kind of the purest or the most commonly understood motivation behind an evaluation. Does the program work? And finally, well, not finally, but yeah, finally, it might be used to respond to political pressures. And this is one that I just want to call your attention to. Sometimes there is an underlying motivation to have an evaluation completed that is politically driven, whether it is for lobbying, whether it is for applying political pressure within an organization or to a government. This is getting away from the essence of what program evaluation was designed to do, which was designed to be objective. If it's too heavily politically influenced, your stakeholders are going to potentially have a lot of bias in their expectations, which will be difficult to manage in the execution of an evaluation that remains true to its objective goals. So if you're ever in a position where you're completing or requested to complete an evaluation, and you see that it is heavily politically motivated, that's the reason. They're not really caring about whether the program works or not. It's serving another political agenda. If you have the option, if you're positioned well, and you do have the ability to say no, you may want to consider it. Politically charged evaluations are kind of like a red flag for me. And it's something that you will need to assess with your ethical and moral compass to find out whether or not it's one that you will want to take on. If it's being ordered by an organization that is your employer, you might have less flexibility, but you still might be able to salvage it. You just need to be able to recognize that your stakeholders may have more bias, especially leaning towards a specific agenda than you would have encountered potentially in other evaluations. Regardless of that motivation behind the request for an evaluation, the questions asked by stakeholders and the questions that are pertinent to the overall purpose of the evaluation need to prioritize the relevant questions. So you have all your stakeholders, you have your sponsor, everybody wants to find out a myriad amount of things. As the evaluator, you need to be able to prioritize those, and that will come from talking to your stakeholders, engaging your stakeholders. You're going to hear me say that over and over throughout the course, but engaging your stakeholders or stakeholder engagement is fundamental to any good evaluation. You may not be able to answer every question under the sun, but prioritizing the questions, talking through what they really need versus what they'd like to know, needs versus wants, it will help to define the breadth of the evaluation or the scope of the evaluation. Often the evaluator needs to dig a bit deeper, consulting those stakeholders, the program materials that say what the purpose of the program was, anything that can help identify what are we actually trying to find out versus all the ideas that may come flooding your way. That's the role of the evaluator. That's part of the evaluation management, is to take control of that, listening to the people who have the questions for you, but also applying some logic and applying some prioritization to what you're going to be tackling. So the evaluator-stakeholder relationship is ongoing. Generally, you'll identify your stakeholders from the beginning. You may identify more as you're going through an evaluation, but that relationship continues throughout. And they'll take different roles. Some of them may be your decision makers. These are people responsible for deciding whether a program is to be initiated, continued, discontinued. They're going to make the decisions based on your results. Program sponsors are another sphere of stakeholder. These are people with positions of responsibility in public agencies or private organizations that initiate and fund the program. They could overlap with the decision makers. Evaluation sponsors. So the program sponsors funded the program. The evaluation sponsor may not be the same as the program sponsor. The evaluation sponsor may be individuals and public agencies or private organizations who initiate and fund the evaluation. So program sponsors and evaluation sponsors, they could be the same entity, they could be different. Another stakeholder group that you're going to want to absolutely keep in mind are the target participants. These are the persons or households or other units that are intended to receive the intervention or services being evaluated. Then you have your program managers. These are personnel responsible for overseeing and administrating the intervention program. So we have a program, somebody's leading the ship there. Your program managers are the ones who are making sure that the program is executed as planned, and they're the ones dealing with any hiccups that come along as that program is unfolding. You have your program staff. These people are responsible for the actual delivery of the program services. So in a big organization, you'll probably have clearly defined program managers and program staff. If it's a very small organization or a very small program, these may overlap a lot, but your program staff are the ones who are boots on the ground, delivering that program, interacting with the target population, offering the services. A few others that linger on the outside that you might want to consider as stakeholders are program competitors. These are organizations or groups that compete with the program. For instance, a private organization receiving public funds to operate private schools will be in competition with public schools that are also supported by public funds. Another possible group to consider are your contextual stakeholders. These are your organizations, groups, and individuals in the environment of a program with interests in what the program is doing or what happens to it. So this could be other agencies or other programs. This could be journalists, public officials. Think about town council. They might be very interested in a program that's targeting homelessness in North Bay. Advocacy organizations, citizen groups in the jurisdiction in which the program operates. There's a lot of people that are around a program who still might be very interested in the outcomes and might want to have a voice in your evaluation. And finally, from a more academic stance, don't forget your evaluation and research community. Evaluation professionals who read evaluations and review their technical quality and credibility are your evaluation specialists. There are researchers who work in this area that are constantly doing research to find out new innovative programming that might be offered. They might be very interested in what your program evaluation determines. These 9 blocks that you see on your screen, some of them will always be there. For example, your target population. They should always be a stakeholder. Some of them are always going to be higher priority stakeholders. So depending on the motivation behind the evaluation that you're completing, your target population or your target participants or your target population generally always going to be among the most important stakeholders. But then you have your program sponsors or your evaluation sponsors. They're putting the money into this. They're probably going to want to have a significant voice in what's going on. Decision makers, sometimes they're active. Sometimes they are asking you pointed questions. Sometimes they are happy enough to just sit back, let you take the reins, and they'll take the information you provide and put it in and synthesize it with other information they're working with. And they may not have as explicit of a voice in your evaluation. Either way, whenever you're starting an evaluation, I want you to think about these potential stakeholders and I want you to be thinking about the particulars of these stakeholders. So if I'm looking at a literacy program for children who are 5 to 7 years old in my community, your target participants are going to be those children. Your contextual stakeholders might be their parents, because they have a vested interest in whether this program helps their children. Some other contextuals might be the teachers, because suddenly you might have a cohort of children who have stronger reading skills coming into that teacher's classroom, and that might be of interest to them. So you just start to get creative and think about who might be interested in the outcome of what I'm looking at. You have to manage your list of stakeholders. You can't make everybody happy. If you have 100 different groups interested in your evaluation, you're going to spend your time managing people and managing their opinions more than you're going to spend time actually consulting them and then getting down to the business of an evaluation. So you want to make sure that it's a comprehensive group. It does not have to be an exhaustive group. It doesn't have to be absolutely everybody, but it definitely needs to be the people who are most integrally tied to this evaluation, who have that interest in it, who have something at stake because of the program and what your findings about that program are going to tell them. Your most influential stakeholder will generally be your evaluation sponsor. The types of relationships you may have with your stakeholders is varied, and it's actually been categorized. This kind of also speaks to the role of the evaluator and the different styles of evaluations. So not the different types, but the different styles where the evaluator is situated. So we're looking at 3 main types. The first is your independent evaluations. These give the evaluator the most control. You are the leader. You are developing the evaluation. You are developing the evaluation questions. You're collaborating with the key stakeholders, and you have autonomy, though, in conducting that evaluation. You're the boss. It's more arm's length. It's more what you would consider an external view on the program. Then we have our participatory or collaborative evaluations, and they're more like a team project. Representatives of key stakeholder groups have equal say in defining the evaluation and making decisions. It's very much like a group project. They're making decisions about the evaluation structure, the execution, the dissemination of results, etc. Everyone is involved in designing the evaluation, collecting data, completing the analysis. So the evaluator's role can fall on a spectrum here, from having a central role as the team's leader, or you could be more of a team coordinator or even an on-call consultant. And that means you're less in control of that evaluation. It's more about what the team wants. Lastly, we have our empowerment evaluations. And here the evaluator is actually a participatory agent. They are embedded in the program. So you might be an evaluator and a case manager. They're entrenched in the process of the program delivery, and they're not only attempting to evaluate the program, but build the capacity of other stakeholders to be able to take on evaluations themselves moving forward. This is the from within evaluation approach, and it's highly resonant with the goal of social impact theory, social change advocacy. This is something that I just created for you guys. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time looking at it, but I do want you to kind of take a peek at it. These are standards that apply to evaluation questions, and multiple ones can apply. So whenever you're looking at developing your evaluation questions, These questions might address the needs and wants of the target population. The questions might target the stated program goals or objectives of the program, might want to compare it to past performance and historical data to see if we're seeing improvement or if we've plateaued or if we're doing worse. Or our questions may want to target cost and relative cost and looking at how much value are we getting for the program. So if you haven't figured this out yet, you will, because I'm going to say it over and over again, probably through the whole course. But evaluation questions are absolutely crucial to any evaluation. Standard research often starts with hypotheses, and these hypotheses are grounded in research questions. And a key component here is that they can be answered via analysis. Similarly, evaluators start with evaluation questions, which are kind of like your research questions. The key is that they are questions about performance, and they're associated with a criteria by which the performance outcome can be judged. Good evaluation questions will, when they can, convey the applicable performance criteria, or criterion if there's multiple, or in other words, the performance standards. So if the question asks, does 80% of group attendees attend all 8 of the program meetings? This is a measurable criterion. This is a criteria that should be based on good rationale, such as previous findings in the scholarly literature that indicate that when at least 80% of attendees complete the entire set of meetings, the entire group has increased short-term and long-term outcomes from the program. What I'm saying here is that these measurements, when possible, should avoid being arbitrary. There should be a reason for choosing those thresholds. Evaluation questions, just like almost anything that we're going to talk about, can be categorized into 5 primary domains. Because evaluation questions are one of the key foundational pieces to an evaluation design, it's important that they are comprehensive and that even the questions themselves are somewhat organized. So evaluation questions lend focus and structure to the design that it will inform. The design being the evaluation design, the evaluation plan. Knowing what questions you're going to ask allows you to set up the rest of the evaluation to answer those questions. Almost like a research proposal with your hypotheses, except here we're making a plan for how we're going to assess something, and that assessment is going to reflect those questions that are being asked. That allows us to target our analysis. Getting these ironed out as concrete as possible sets that evaluation up on a very foundational level. While there are innumerable questions that could be asked, generally evaluation questions can be categorized as targeting one of 5 domains. The need for the program. So why are we offering this program? What is the social need? Is there a social need? Program theory and design. So that here we're looking at questions about program conceptualization and design. So the actual nuts and bolts of, okay, we want a program that's addressing this need. Here's how we are going to address it. Here's the interventions we're going to offer. Here's how we're going to offer them. Here's the resources we're going to need. Here's why we think it's going to work. Program process. So these are questions about program operations, implementation, service delivery, and the way that recipients experience the program services. Program impact. Again, this is probably the most widely recognized understanding of evaluations when we're looking at the impact of that program. Similarly, the evaluation questions for that type of evaluation are going to want to ask questions about impact. They're asking questions about program change in the targeted outcomes and the program's impact on those changes. Every program has a causal philosophy behind it. If I offer X, Y, and Z, I'm expecting to see an increase or decrease in this need area or this behavior or this situation. So the impact questions are really targeted to that change process, that change assumption, and measuring whether that change is actually happening. And finally, program efficiency. These are questions about program cost and cost effectiveness. Are we getting good worth for the amount of money and resources and time and other inputs that were devoted to the program? So I'm going to just kind of go over these in a little bit more detail, each of the 5. Needs-based questions and approaches are the first step in planning a program. We don't even have a program yet, let alone a program to evaluate its outcomes. Right now, we need to assess what need is out there. It's pretty intuitive. If there's no need, there's no point in planning and implementing a program. Needs assessments provide information about the nature of the social condition and the issues and the implications for the ways that it might be effectively addressed is often a first step in planning a new program. So we need to identify our need, and then we need to talk about how we're going to effectively address that need. Then we have our questions that are addressing the assessment of program theory and design. So the conceptualization and operational plan of a program needs to reflect reality. The assumptions about the nature of the problem need to be valid, and they need to represent a feasible approach to reducing the gap between current and acceptable levels of the problematic condition. What does this mean? It means if you're going to design a program, you're going to be making assumptions. You're going to make assumptions that, again, if I offer X, I can expect Y to happen. These need to be grounded in reality. They need to be culturally resonant. They need to be socially resonant. They need to be grounded in reality. This is the realm of the questions which assess program theory and program design. The questions often look at the cause and effect process and the theory behind that. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail whenever we turn our attention to the role of program theory. The program theory and design questions can address the action and outcome dichotomy. What intervention will the program offer, and what is the anticipated result to come from that? They're looking at the logic of the program rooted in social science and behavioral theories of change. Why can we expect this intervention to lead to this result? The answer to this should be rooted in the existing scholarly literature and informed by relevant theory in an ideal world. I want to introduce at this point the concept of a logic model. We'll talk about these in far more detail down the road, but it kind of helps to visualize this program theory and design and these interrelationships. So logic models are often employed to detail these cause and effect relationships, and they're generally organized around the inputs required for the program, the actions or activities to be undertaken, the outputs from those activities, and the immediate, intermediate, and long-term outcomes the program aims to influence. So if you take a little look at the one that I have on the screen, you can see how they define a fairly simple program targeting childhood literacy. We're going to input some staff time, some funding, some supplies. In the real world, these would be highly defined. The activities we're going to offer, we're going to do this through story time. Our outputs, well, we should have 15 attendees make their way through our storytime program. And finally, what are our outcomes? Well, the goal is that the caregivers and the children learn early literacy skills. Very simple, but it's showing how if we set up the program to have the resources it needs, we can expect that A will lead to B, and it defines who needs to be involved, what resources do we need available, and so on and so forth. This is a very straightforward example. These can get very messy very fast with complicated and complex programs, but I just want you to be able to visualize that, because if you're like me, sometimes seeing that process actually diagrammed out is worth more than all the words I can speak to you. Again, we'll revisit this down the road, but I just want to introduce that concept and that ability to visualize this stage or this type of evaluation at this point. Assessments of program processes. So here we're looking at the actual processes at work within the program. You can have the best designed program. It can be rooted in sound theory and assumptions, but a critical misstep in the implementation can really knock it flat. It's going to impact its effectiveness and make it really a lot more complex for the evaluator to assess in the end to see whether or not it actually did impact change. This is where the term program fidelity comes into play. We want to make sure that a program is faithful to the program design. So we're asking questions about how closely the program delivery matches the program plan. And we want to be able to identify deviations and departures, because those can really impact whether or not we're going to be able to come back and measure whether the program was effective. If I am offering a program where I am supposed to be targeting males who are 18 to 34 years old and who have a history of homelessness, and my program actually accepts female millionaires, I mean, that's an extreme example, but clearly somewhere along the way the program was derailed. Is there really any point now in assessing whether or not I reduced the incidence of homelessness in my target population? Not really, because the program didn't actually deliver what it needed to. So process evaluation is interested in how consistently the program is delivered, whether the participants accessing the program match the targeted population. It wants to know about the use of resources, and it can be done at one point in time. So I might early on take a look to make sure that and ask these process related questions, or I might be asked to do this periodically throughout the program's delivery, kind of to monitor the program's delivery. A process evaluation can mitigate early concerns, and it can provide justification for ongoing support of the program. It's one of the most powerful evaluations in the evaluator's arsenal. It can help to address training issues, identify unforeseen barriers to delivery, and it can allow for a program to get back on track if it has deviated. A program that's deviated does not necessarily mean it's over or that we need to start from the beginning again. But it's important to identify these deviations early on so that we can get that program integrity back in check. The effectiveness of a program. So these are questions and these are methods that are tackling the effectiveness of a social program. And that effectiveness is gauged by the change it produces in outcomes that represent the intended improvements in the social conditions it addresses. Meaning that the intervention's goal of bringing about the desired change was met, and to a degree that is judged to be successful. Remember, we talked about defining what success means. This heavily relies on that operationalization, wow, I can't say it tonight, and execution of the program theory and program delivery plan. Impact evaluation asks whether the desired outcomes were actually attained and whether the changes included unintended side effects. So sometimes we'll see what we hope to see in a program, but then we might see some unintended side effects, which could be positive and they could be negative. The negative unintended results are of greater concern, as the intention of the program was likely to bring about positive change to the community without there being a secondary cost. An impact evaluation, just as a heads up, is not to be entered into lightly. It involves considerable time and resources, and it can be difficult to actually complete while the program is running without interfering with it. If you interfere with it, then questions arise of whether or not you impacted the program's fidelity and integrity, and then whether or not the program with your influence is running as it should. The evaluator must weigh in on how well the program is being implemented too, since completing an impact assessment on a program that has gone off the rails serves little purpose, and it will come at a great expense and resource investment. A significant portion of our course is going to be spent on impact evaluations. So right now, just kind of take the ballpark away, the general idea, because we're going to dig into that far more as we move our way through the course. Finally, the last realm of evaluation questions and the corresponding evaluations that go with it are the cost analysis and efficiency assessments. So a careful description of the full cost of a program is referred to as a cost analysis. It goes beyond describing the costs needed to operate a program. The efficiency assessment builds on it and takes account of the relationship between a program's costs and its effectiveness. So maybe we have a program and we see a 25% decrease in that need area. And we run back to, say, the mayor of North Bay, and we're very excited about this. And he might look at us and say, I poured $5 million into this, and we only see a 25% decrease. Where is my value for the money? How can we justify doing this again? So efficiency assessments may take the form of a cost-benefit analysis or a cost-effectiveness analysis, asking, respectively, whether a program produces sufficient benefits in relation to its costs, and whether other interventions or delivery systems can produce the benefits at a lower cost. One thing I just want to mention, and you've probably picked up on this by now, but none of these 5 areas are exclusive from one another. They don't operate in isolation. Often there will be overlap, and the results from one area will impact the feasibility of even conducting an evaluation in another area. For example, if the program is not targeting a relevant need, we're already off on the wrong foot. If we have a relevant need, but the program's logic regarding its underlying theories or assumptions about how to bring about the change are faulty, it's probably going to fall flat on its face. If we have a sound program process and delivery model built on a sound need, but when it's implemented, it departs from how it was supposed to be delivered, we can't really expect to see the outcomes we predicted. And even if we do see those outcomes, we can't necessarily now attribute it to the program as it was intended to be run. But say we have a need, a relevant need, a justified need, a good program, and strong program fidelity, then we're at a point where we can say, yep, let's measure those outcomes. Let's look at that impact and let's see if we see the outcomes we hope for. Even then, will the outcomes be worth the resources? That's where we get into our cost efficiency analyses. Could we get a better bang for the buck another way? Everything can be correct. The whole program can operate perfectly, and yet the program still might not succeed or continue. And it won't necessarily be the fault of the program. It may come down to money and resources. Indeed, the implementation phase of a program is so crucial that when program services that are not actually delivered are not fully or adequately delivered, or are not the intended services, to the point that the change process cannot take place, evaluators call it an implementation failure. So that means at that stage where the program went from being written in perhaps a manual to actually executed, and it was not fully and adequately and accurately delivered, the implementation of the program failed. In these cases, the effects are so weak or non-existent because the necessary steps to bring about the outcomes were not taken. But a program may be well implemented and still yet fail to achieve the desired impact because the program design and theory embodied in the corresponding program activities are faulty. So it's going back to that interplay that these different domains of evaluation impact each other. And where one is weak, it's going to impact another or multiple evaluation opportunities and evaluation feasibility down the road. This is where I offered a 10-minute break to our in-class participants this week. So if you need to take a break and you haven't already, I know you're studying at your own pace right now, feel free to just pause this and come back whenever you're ready. The rest of us are going to push forward. I promise the second half of this will go far more quickly than the first half. All right, let's pick up on where we're going next. We've talked about those 5 domains of evaluation, and I indicated that the rest of the course builds upon that. So we're going to start from the very beginning, which is that needs assessment. Remember, at the point of the needs assessment, we don't even have a program implemented or possibly even conceptualized. Right now, we need to put the horse in front of the cart and first establish that there is a need area that can be demonstrated. We need to justify that there is an actual need in a community and start to define what that means and what that could mean for program implementation down the road. So in a perfect world, an evaluator would be engaged and positioned to conduct an initial needs assessment prior to the rollout of any program. This is a textbook perfect world. And sometimes you are absolutely positioned to do that. That might mean that you work for an organization and somebody says, hey, I think we might have some needs. Can you please do some work to identify some underserviced populations in our community and propose some need areas we might fill with some programs? This doesn't always happen in the real world, but when it does, it can have a significant impact on the delivery of a timely and impactful program because you as the evaluator are there from the very beginning, and from the very beginning of the process, everything is being systematically designed and researched and looked at. So, to recap from earlier this class, we need to establish the need for the program. We're asking the questions about the social conditions of a program and the conditions that the program is intended to ameliorate and the need for the program. It all goes back to that very simple premise. There's no point in offering a program if we haven't demonstrated and justified that this need area that the program targets actually exists. We discussed a lot of this earlier on, just discussing the different types of programs. But now we're going to get into some of the more nuts and bolts of specifically the needs assessment. So while social programs may generally seek to do good, a needs assessment can assist by identifying needs that may not always be the most evident, vocal, or even noticed. Additionally, social programs rely heavily on assumptions and accepted, often anecdotal, narratives about the nature of programs, as well as the characteristics, needs, and responses of the populations they serve. What do I mean by this? Usually, or not usually, but oftentimes, social programs will be designed around what people who work with the target population observe. It's not to say that it's wrong, but it may not be as systematically analyzed as when you bring an evaluator in from the beginning. Sometimes a needs assessment can be conducted to identify a particular need. And sometimes it will even go as far as conducting a needs assessment without a specific social program in mind, but rather it's the impetus, it's the starting point. The evaluator is identifying a potential need, and then organizational policymakers can go ahead and plan and make the decision about what need they're going to serve, and then the program can be developed. Or if you're adopting, I guess, a program that's already developed, policymakers and program managers can actually start to look at what would be the best program to meet the need that we've identified. Evaluators are key to diagnosing social programs and social needs and can be a major asset to advocacy initiatives and person-focused projects. Evaluators help to build the bridge between grassroots and community initiatives and government and formal agencies. The role of the evaluator can't be underappreciated here or underrepresented. The ability to systematically document and convey information gives enhanced credibility to the identification and response to social problems. We're taking our social science and lending evidence to it. This can offset contentions based on speculation, anecdotal observations, political pressures, and vested interests. It can also safeguard against false conclusions and biases that are, usually unintentionally, persistent in organizations that have been involved with the perceived problems and stakeholders for a while. Sometimes a problem never was a problem, or sometimes the problem has been resolved, but the narratives surrounding it continue. When you're embedded in an organization, sometimes you don't see the change until later, much later, or until somebody comes and analyzes the data and corrects these long-running narratives about the problems that supposedly exist and which at one time did exist. That's organizational culture. We stick to the narratives a lot of times that become embedded in the organizational culture. And change in narratives in an organizational culture are very, very difficult. So as an evaluator, when you're looking to diagnose a social condition or find the service needs, there's 3 basic phases of the needs assessment that you're going to go through. It helps to look at it as a 3-phase process because you can kind of see the pre, the during, and the post assessment stages. So the pre-assessment, it involves the exploratory phase. It's like exploratory research, where the evaluator is taking stock of what the problem may be, conceptualizing it, and looking at how it could be defined, the extent of the program, who might be affected, and an initial identification of that gap that exists between what should be and what is. And that right there, in a nutshell, is what a need is. There is the ideal should be. Everybody should be able to afford to put food on the table. What is? There are certain subpopulations that don't have the same access to food. And then as you start to drill down on the nuances of that situation in your particular community, you're identifying what your need is. It's that gap between what should be and what is. That's the pre-assessment. You're starting to identify that. You might not have completely ironed it out, but you're starting to actually conceptualize that. Then we have the assessment phase. This is where you're actually completing the needs assessment on the identified need that came out of your pre-assessment. This can involve further defining the needs and the target population and delving into the complexities and nuances of these areas. You're starting to posit what theories about what is causing these needs or these gap areas. You're going to look at data collection plans, data collection itself, analysis, interpretation. This is where you're going to look at these. You're going to look at these pieces at this stage as appropriate. And then you're going to disseminate the results and meet with the stakeholders. This leads you into the post-assessment. This is where you're going to propose the next steps. What actions need to be taken to resolve the problem? What kinds of programs might be appropriate? You're going to talk to your stakeholders, review possible solutions, and propose an action plan. At this point, I want to kind of clarify something though. You're identifying the need as an evaluator. You have your evaluator hat on, and you're basically substantiating your claim that this need exists, how we can address it, what the need magnitude is, the volume of the need, the prevalence of the need, and you're saying, okay, here's what we could do based on evidence, based on scholarly literature, based on comparative studies to make an impact on this need area. You're not always going to be the program developer or the person who adopts the program if you're looking for a canned shelved program. Sometimes you will be one and the same, depending on your organization and what they ask of you. Sometimes at this point, you might hand it off to somebody who's a subject matter expert, because you might say, okay, I've noticed that we have a distinct lack of substance abuse programming in this particular segment of the population. Here's some specifics about that need that exist. And one of those could be potentially involving some cognitive behavioral therapy or other psychological approaches where they might bring somebody in to develop that program who is an expert in psychology-based programming. So I'm not saying that you're not the program developer, and I'm not guaranteeing you will be the program developer. I just want you to remember, for the purpose of our course, we're not developing the program. We're evaluating the different stages that can lead to a successful program. We're working collaboratively with the program makers, the program deliverers, implementers. But for the purpose of the scope of our program or our course here, keep your evaluation hat on. Try not to be sucked into and the program should be based on this, that, and the other. That's not our realm necessarily to speak to. So let's go back to the beginning, just like we did at the beginning of this class, looking at what a social problem is, but with our needs assessment hat on. During a needs assessment, you're going to want to explore the problem and contemplate what a problem even is. Social theories would argue that a problem is not an objective fact, but rather a social construction. When examining a problem, try to think of it through this lens. If it's a social construct where the combination of conditions constituting problems, or they constitute problems requiring public attention and intervention, then the solution will also involve a public societal collaborative effort to change the social reality. To simplify this, if the problem is socially defined and it exists in the social world, then the solution is also going to involve some societal, social, collaborative efforts to bring about change in that social reality. Little hint, these public and social individuals and groups probably should be possible stakeholders. So for example, it's generally agreed that poverty is a social problem. The observable facts or statistics on the distribution of income and assets, but these stats don't define poverty. They merely allow an analysis which can determine how many people are poor when a definition is given. It's not giving the definition of poverty itself. Nor do stats and rates establish poverty as a social problem. They only characterize a situation that individuals and social agents may view as problematic. Moreover, because the definition of poverty and the goals of programs to improve the lot of the poor can vary over time among communities and among stakeholders, a one-size-fits-all definition probably doesn't exist. I can't say that for this population at this particular time, poverty is defined the same way as another population at a different period of time. How Canada as a nation legally defines poverty is different than how another nation is going to define it. It's not objective. It is created based on criteria and reflections and research, but it doesn't just exist in the world. So that goes back to making sure that at every stage of an evaluation, you're thinking about the specifics and getting into those underlying details, because the more detail you have, the more likely you are going to be able to not only operationalize and conceptualize that, you're going to be able to communicate it to your stakeholders to make sure everybody's on the same page, and you're going to be able to find out ways, and you're going to be able to be creative to find ways to measure it down the road to see if if change was brought about, if there was an impact. After you've defined a program, you need to look at the scope and extent of that program. So you might be looking at how many people does the problem impact, what are the consequences, how severe are they, how widespread are they, how consistent are they. It's important to get measurements to find out the size and distribution and density of the issue. If you only have 2 people in 100,000 that you can identify as having this need, it may not justify a program. The number of people that you identify as requiring your services, it's going to impact the size of the solution needed and the associated human and financial resources. The spatial distribution will impact potential barriers and logistics. Are we looking at a problem impacting a dense urban space that's clearly defined and contained, say, within 3 city blocks? Or are we looking at a low number of impacted people in a rural space that is spread out over hundreds of kilometers? Program and service delivery need to consider these factors. Most of you have taken a statistics or quantitative methods course somewhere along your academic journey, so you may recall probability samples. just to recap, the population is the entire group that you want to draw conclusions about. The sample is the specific group of individuals that you will collect data from. The sample should be, as far as possible, representative of the total population, because the population is everybody, and chances are we're not going to get to intervene with everybody. The probability sampling is a commonly used method in the social sciences to ensure that the characteristics of a sample of the population can be used to estimate the characteristics of the full population from which the sample was drawn. In a probability sample, every member of the study population has a known non-zero chance of being selected. So we all stand the same chance of being in the sample. The key to obtaining a probability sample is the availability of a complete list of the units in the target population to use as the sampling frame. A good sampling frame lists all the units that are members of the target population. So this could be all individuals. No units that are not members of the target population. So if you are not, for example, a child between the age of 5 and 7 for my childhood literacy program, you are not included. No units are included more than once, and individual units rather than groups or clusters of units. I don't want you to get too caught up in this. I want you to understand this from a conceptual level, but this isn't a methodology course. So kind of don't get too caught up in the overall nuances. I want you to understand why we do probability sampling, the value of sampling, which is basically we probably won't have access to the entire group, but we need a representative group to measure from. There are several sampling methods. The book does cover them. Again, this isn't a methodology course, but I want you to understand the strengths and the weaknesses that these different approaches that are inherent of these different approaches. So let's talk about simple random sampling quickly. Here, every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Systematic sampling, it's similar to simple random sampling, but it's usually slightly easier to conduct. Every member of the population is listed with a number, 1 through 1,000, let's say. But instead of randomly generating numbers to choose people like you would in the simple, intervals are chosen at regular intervals. So let's say I have 1,000 people, everybody is ordered, and then I want to choose every 7th individual. Stratified sampling involves dividing the population into subpopulations that may differ in important ways. It allows you to draw more precise conclusions by ensuring that every subgroup is properly represented in the sample. So to do this, you divide the population into subgroups. We call them strata, and that's based on the relevant characteristics. So it could be gender identity, age, range, income bracket, job role. Based on the overall proportions of the population, you calculate how many people should be sampled from each subgroup, and then you use the random or systematic sampling to select a sample from each subgroup. You're likely to also hear me use the term indicator a lot whenever we're discussing evaluations. And I just want to clarify this. A social indicator is a periodic measurement designed to track the course of social conditions over time. So these data can be used to estimate the size and distribution of the social problem whose course is being tracked over time. Secondly, the trends shown can be used to alert decision makers to whether the pertinent conditions are improving or remaining the same or deteriorating. So common social indicators include crime rates, And that could be measured also or they could be used to tap into concepts such as public safety, sense of security, etc. Employment rates, this can be used to tap into social and economic conditions. Life expectancy might tap into overall health levels. Level of education might tap into educational opportunities and accessibility, and so on and so forth. Essentially, these are ways to gauge whether our condition is changing, and they are large ones that aren't specific necessarily to our specific need area, but might shed light on our need area. Another important piece, and we mentioned this earlier, is we need to be able to find out the extent of the problem, or we need to be able to estimate the magnitude of the problem. And sometimes this can be measured by accessing already existing data housed by agencies. So for example, if we're looking at overdoses, we know that health clinics and hospitals may have files on overdose cases. The police may have some. However, we need to be critical of these sources because there could be bias in the data. Ultimately, if you think about overdoses, some will go to the health clinic for treatment. Some cases will involve police involvement, but there's probably a lot that are happening behind closed doors that we will never know. So we're likely, if we use agency records, we're likely significantly underreporting the true number because many people may never call 911 or receive treatment from a health clinic. If that's not working, you might want to look at surveys and censuses. So you might want to develop a survey for a sample of your population, or you might want to complete a census for your entire target population. These allow you to tap into and ask questions of the actual target population and gauge their responses as an indicator for the prevalence of whatever condition or social need you're looking at. These are time consuming, they're resource consuming, and also there are biases that might be introduced because if you're asking how many times have you experienced X, if it is something that might not be as socially acceptable, you may not be getting truthful answers. And finally, I want to talk about key informant surveys as a way to gauge the extent of your problem. These are another option, possibly the easiest, but definitely not the most reliable. It involves asking key informants about the nature, magnitude, and distribution of your problem. These people may have experienced the problem themselves. They may have worked with people who have experienced the problem. The key caveat is that objectivity is always a concern. And it's often the case that these key informants have the bird's eye view on the need area, despite they probably don't have the bird's eye view. They are entrenched in it, and sometimes you can't see crucial details of the social situation because you're too close to the problem. Sometimes you're going to be asked to forecast needs, and that's one way of establishing the extent or potential extent of the problem. Projecting or forecasting the magnitude of the need in the future is a tricky endeavor. The longer the time frame, the more unreliable estimates are likely to be, regardless of how methodologically sound they are. This is because there's too many variables and social spheres to necessarily predict. So for example, if it was 2011 and you were asked to predict how many students would need residence housing in Nipissing in 2021, you would probably draw from past data, employ some beautiful quantitative techniques, and forecast the 2021 predictions. And yet there's no way you'd be able to predict the arrival and impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which essentially reduced the residents' populations to all-time lows. So let's say we've tried to establish the extent of our problem area for our target population. Well, we also need to clearly define that target population. A clear component at the beginning of the needs assessment is defining who the program is targeting, which is your target population. This can be based on observed need or also be informed by the literature on the subject. For example, perhaps you notice that senior-aged females in the community report higher levels of fear of physical victimization, and you want to run an 8-week self-defense and safety class to increase their perception of feeling safe. In this case, you may define the target population as individuals identifying as female between the ages of 55 and 70 who reside within the North Bay city limits. You're saying, here's the group I know really needs these services to meet their need. I am explicitly defining who is eligible for my programming, who is not, who should be there, and who should not. Similarly, you will have defined your target population. You also need to specify the targets. So adequate specification of a target population establishes boundaries. That is, rules determining who or what is included and excluded. And sometimes you're going to hear that referred to as eligibility criteria. Remember, at this point, we're looking at a needs evaluation. So the program hasn't been developed yet, but we, based on our research, are advising that this is a need area to be targeted, and this is the particular details and characteristics of the people or groups who should be targeted. Another issue in the definition of target populations can arise from differing perspectives by professionals, politicians, and other stakeholders involved. Because remember, again, as much as you are kind of in the driver's seat, you're not operating alone. Other people have a vested interest in what you determine, and they are going to want to have their voices heard in what you propose. So, to ensure everyone is on the same page, it's vital to flesh out the nuances of the target population definition and recognize that sometimes you can't appease everyone. At least by having a clearly specified definition, you can clearly communicate what the intended population is to others, and ideally, this will have been arrived at by consulting various stakeholders and finding the most viable common ground amongst everyone. There are a few approaches to describing target populations. The population at risk, so you may have defined that it's your, children 5 to 7 years old who live within this school board boundary. You've defined those pieces, but now you need to also include whether they're experiencing the problem or likely to. So the population at risk consists of those persons or units with a significant probability of experiencing or developing the condition to which the program is designed to respond. So, for example, the population at risk in birth control programs is usually defined as women of childbearing age. This term is borrowed from public health, but it's apt for social program evaluation. This term can only be used to refer to probabilities. Obviously, just because it's probable that a person falls within this population does not mean that they will experience the social condition. Humans are complicated. So you're predicting who will probably be within your pool, but that does not mean that they will end up experiencing that social need. We just think that everything is stacking up that we can predict that they will be. Additionally, members of a population in need can be identified through direct assessments of their condition. For example, there are reliable and valid literacy tests that can be used to identify the functionality of illiterate persons, and these can constitute the population in need for adult literacy programs. That is the difference between your population at risk and your population in need. Your population at risk are likely to, at some point, develop this need area. Your population in need are already currently experiencing that. One more piece you're going to want to consider is incidence and prevalence of that need. These two terms give us an idea of the magnitude of the problem within a specified time frame. Incidence refers to new cases of the problem. For example, new COVID diagnoses within a 1-week time frame. All new cases are new incidences in this particular example. Prevalence refers to all existing cases. For example, how many have had COVID? It will include new cases as well as those that existed before but are still active when the time window begins. You're often going to hear your target populations talked about in terms of rates. Rates allow for the standardizing of measures, which allows for comparison both to other jurisdictions, perhaps, but also against itself down the road to determine whether an intervention may have succeeded. So whenever we say that our initial, incidence rates is 20 out of every 100 people, down the road, we can also compare back against that to make a comparative assessment on whether this improved, whether there was no improvement, or whether it actually got worse. I just want to remind you, high rates are not always bad. When you hear the crime rate is skyrocketing, yes, in that case, crime is more prevalent, crime rates, a higher one is bad. But really it depends on how the problem is defined. And that is, so sometimes high, if it's, let's say literacy rates, for example, low literacy rates are bad, high literacy rates are good. So to be effective, a program must adapt its services to the local nature of the problem and the distinct circumstances of the target population. Basically what we're saying here is we need to customize the program to meet the needs of the population while recognizing the uniqueness of that population. A one-size-fits-all program probably isn't going to work. This in turn requires information about the way in which the problem is experienced by those in that population, their perceptions and attributions about relevant services and programs, and the barriers and difficulties they encounter in attempting to access services. This is where your qualitative methods can really come in handy. They're useful for obtaining detailed, textured knowledge of the specific needs in question. And I love that term, textured knowledge. Statistics can tell you some very objective trends and patterns. It can help establish magnitudes, and it can help you predict the future forecasts for the particular need. But there's also the side where those who are experiencing the need possibly have the best understanding of the complexity of that need. And so qualitative methods, whether you're conducting interviews of a few persons to elaborate and detailed ethnographic research, can help you get that textured knowledge, peel back the layers, and get that almost insider perspective on what that need area is and how it's actually impacting the members of that target population. When you're looking to get that nuanced qualitative information, a useful way to identify those informants is your snowball sampling method, in which an initial set of informants is located and asked to identify other informants who they believe to be knowledgeable about the matter at issue. Those informants, in turn, are also asked to identify other appropriate informants. The group of individuals that are identified can be brought together in focus groups for a discussion of a particular topic or theme facilitated by someone who is trained to elicit meaningful comments while minimizing conflict when disagreements arise. Focus groups can be a wealth of qualitative information, subjective, often subjective, opinions and reflections on whatever that need area is. And the data that you can elicit from that can reveal common themes, common trends, and potential avenues that your program will want to tackle, or particular considerations that are relevant and resonant to that community, so that the program is appropriately designed to meet their specific needs. And that brings us to the end of this week's content. Thank you for your patience. Even recorded, this turned out to be a fairly long lecture, and I just appreciate that you stuck with me this long, and I hope that it helps to solidify some of the information we're talking about, and that it will help to generate a strong foundation as we move forward. So now we've talked about the basics of what a social program is and what an evaluation is, and we've even covered off one of the specific domains, the needs assessment evaluation. This brings us to our application assignment, our very first one. I want you to start thinking with an evaluation lens. This first round of questions are exploratory, simply to start thinking about where needs exist. You're targeting, you're putting on your evaluation hat, you are the evaluator, and you have been asked to start putting together a needs assessment. This is a social science course with people coming in from many different backgrounds, interests, and talents, and I'm not going to tell you what you have to study. I want you to follow your interests, what you're already involved in perhaps, or where you could potentially see yourself down the road if you were to follow a path that could lead you to some evaluation work. Stretch your mind. For some of you, this may be the start of your final paper. For others, you may pivot and revise from this down the road. You're not choosing your final paper path yet. If you're split between two options, pick one or explore both if you have the time. Just get your brain going. So I've come up with 3 questions that I want you to tackle this week, and they'll be due by the end of next Tuesday. I want you to submit them on Blackboard. I've set up a space under the content section, and I want you to just start thinking. So the first question asks you to consider a field that interests you. It could be healthcare, crime, education, etc. I want you to identify and describe a related need area that could be targeted by a program or an intervention in that field. Be specific and be sure to include who the target population might be and relevant contextual details. Where is this? What age group are you interested in? Are there cultural norms that should be anticipated and incorporated? Are there barriers to access that you already know about? At this point, you're not completing a full needs evaluation. But I want you to start to think about, if you were to find a need, what are some of those important characteristics of the need and the target population that you would want to make sure that you have a clear, firm understanding of. Right now, it's okay if you're kind of guessing. It's okay if you say, you know what, I don't know about the cultural norms yet, but that's an area I know I should look into. all you're doing is brainstorming. This is a brainstorming activity, especially this first one. To that point, as long as I see you trying, there are no wrong answers, because what you're doing and what I'm hoping you're doing is you're starting to take the information from our class and from the textbook, and you're trying to apply it to a real world example, even if it's hypothetical at this point. Once you've completed question 1, question 2 and 3 refer back to it. So with your need area, I want you to think about potential stakeholders who you should consult or engage for this needs assessment, and maybe even start to rank them or prioritize them. So again, we're not in the program evaluation stage yet. We're not even potentially at the point where we have a program being offered. We're at the very beginning, before the program, where we're saying, here is what is, here is what should be, here is that space in between that is my need. And in terms of your stakeholders, here are the individuals and groups who might have an interest in this that I should probably talk to make sure that I can start to answer their questions. That leads you to question 3. Formulate 3 to 5 research questions that are relevant to understanding this need. So evaluation questions are a great opportunity here. Perhaps you've identified that the mayor of your town would be a stakeholder. One of the questions might be from his or her perspective. What would be relevant to a person in that position? Again, right now it's speculative. Right now it's literally the beginning of the course. I'm not expecting this to be incredibly complex. I'm not expecting this to be overly sophisticated at this point. But we're getting the wheels turning. We're starting to take the textbook knowledge and think about what it could look like if we were boots on the ground actually having to complete an evaluation and starting from scratch. Please prepare your responses on Blackboard under the corresponding assignment folder in the content section. And like I mentioned last week, these are pass-fail. So as long as I see you making the attempt, you're good. These are not 500-word responses. They can be short jot notes. They can be notes for future you to refer back to. We're almost starting to build some ideas that may lead us towards our final paper and may help us down the road. Any questions, feel free to email me. And with that said, have a great week, and I'll see you next time.